I spent many a day of my teenage years visiting my then boyfriend who was being detained at Her Majesty's pleasure in HM Prison, Hull. I will never forget picking him up at the prison gates, him wearing his prison-issue clothes and with all of his belongings in a transparent carrier bag. We'd drive home back to the estate, me full of optimism that this time would be different and him determined that it would be so. Yet, inevitably, the cycle would repeat itself somewhere down the line. Not because he was a bad person, it was because then that was the only life that he really knew. And this experience has made me passionate in my belief that we need to consider prisons differently. Yes, it absolutely must be a place of punishment, and I'd argue even more so than it currently is. But if we want to reduce the reoffending rate, which, by the way, costs society up to £15 billion a year, then we must also focus on rehabilitation and re-education. And I was pleased, therefore, when I heard this week that more prisoners will now be allowed day release to enter the world of work, and that hundreds of new employers have signed up to be a part of this scheme. However unpalatable it may seem to some, if we truly want to break the cycle, we must start doing things differently when it is safe to do so.
Should start with a word of praise for private enterprise here. A company called Timpson's, which owns Johnson's and Jeeves Dry Cleaners, Snappy Snaps, Max Spielman, I've not heard of, and various others. Good luck to them, they make a point, so things like that is to be encouraged. Let me ask you, and you've got a obviously closer association, fortunately, than I, through your ex-boyfriend. Why is prison failing?
Well, it's not just that prison's failing in its terms that, well, actually it is in some instances. I think when you go into prison, you've got to be there as a deterrent and a punishment. And if I speak of my experience with my ex, he quite liked it in there. What sort of crime did he do? Do you mind asking? Various different things, you know, nothing like murder or anything like that, various low-level bits and pieces. But for him, he went into prison, he saw his mates, he got free access to a gym, he got some decent food, and he didn't mind it, quite frankly. So, you know...
Would he have wanted to benefit from a scheme such as the one that was outlined this week?
If it was offered to him, then possibly, possibly not. But I would argue that actually so many organisations, they already employ people with criminal records, ex-offenders. They don't know about it because, as the Timpson's guy quite rightly points out, people have to lie on their applications to get into business. If they've got a conviction, often they have to lie about it. Just before
I yield, this is what the government's saying in the shape of Justice Secretary David Gauke.
I think it's really important that we offer people a second chance. All the evidence shows that those who leave prison and then go into work are much less likely to reoffend.
So that's what the Justice Secretary is saying. Two former Justice Ministers, Mike Penning and Sir Oliver Heald, to broaden it out, is saying that the early release of prisoners is wrong, and that as and when you're sentenced to a term, you should have a minimum...
really?
Yes, no, but I'm just broadening it out. The idea of you're sentenced to 6 years, you're not. It's 3 years, unless you set fire to the jail.
Yeah.
Well, what they're talking about, just to broaden it out a bit, is you'll set a minimum term or a maximum term, and you can take time off the maximum term. If you move into a work scheme and you are seen to go into it wholeheartedly and actually work towards it, you will bring down the time spent. That would seem to be another added incentive, really, to abiding by it.
I've got a question, Michelle. This raises to me a question in my mind, which is that why don't we just cut out the middleman? The prison population has gone up fourfold since 1950. There are 82,000 people in prison in England and Wales, as against 20,000 in 1950. Do you think your boyfriend should have been in prison for what he did? I mean, the reoffending rate is 64%, so why don't you just take an offender, don't put them in prison, just put them straight into work?
What?
No, I do think that he should have been in prison.
Well, it obviously doesn't work being in prison.
I do,
because he kept going back in.
Yeah, but the reason that people reoffend, it's quite complicated. When you come out of prison and you go back, in our case, to the estate, to the same crowd of people, to the same daily life that you had before you went into that environment, nothing changes.
Nothing works.
If you take people out of the prisons and you show them a different way of life, so you show them you can go into work, you can be trusted, you can get skills, you can earn money. Because, by the way, I'm convinced that some of Britain's best entrepreneurs are behind bars. When you look at some of the entrepreneurialism of these people, it's insane. Greg?
I've been involved in prison charities for some while, and I've just joined one as a trustee where we're trying to link up the prisons with the local football clubs. And I think they're making some success. But when the statistic that concerned me most when I first got involved in prisons was something like 10% of journalists' kids become journalists, 15% of lawyers' kids become lawyers, 65% of prisoners' sons become prisoners, and amongst women the figure is even higher. There's far fewer women in prison, but it seems to me that's where I agree with you entirely. You've got to you're not only affecting this generation, you're affecting the next generation, and it's quite encouraging. I think this government on this whole area of prisons and justice has been rather good. It's been quite liberal. It's been it's worked out that you can't just go from... I made a programme years ago when we said if the number of prisoners went above 40,000, we'd have a crisis. As you said, it's now 80-odd thousand. You can't just keep putting more and more people in prison. You've got to do something about it. And I think what you're saying is right.
Yeah, my sort of soft liberal persona says this is the right thing to do. But I wonder about a couple of aspects of this. First of all, I wonder if we're that good at judging who should be eligible for day release. Because one thing you said is, not all people who get convicted of crimes are quote-unquote bad people. They are, as you say, people who are in tricky circumstances or face difficulties in their lives. And oddly enough, paradoxically, in some cases, actually staying behind bars away from the world might be the best thing for some of them. Not for everybody, but some people who, for example, are drug addicts, or some people who...
You've got to let them out eventually.
You've got to let them out, but my point is that I'm not sure that we're that great at understanding exactly how to make the judgment at the moment. And that would be my worry about this. Simply to say, it's nice for people to say, let's give everybody day release, but that might not be the right thing for everybody, and I just don't know if we've got the mechanism to make the distinction.
No, and I think you're absolutely spot on. You've got to have a proper, thought-through framework, and at the moment, the new proposals are that you've got to have been in for 3 months before you can be eligible for this. It used to be 12, I think. So you're already starting to understand the character of the person, and you need to be sensible about the work placements. I mean, if someone's been convicted of a sex offence against a child, you're not going to put them into a nursery, day release, paid employment, obviously.
Open jail anyway in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So it is like, to your point, it's open jails we're talking about, it's women's prisons, it's people on the lower end of the criminal spectrum, if that's the word. And for me, I just think if you truly want to get people rehabilitated, which we should, and I told you how much it's costing us, I think it's 15 billion, you have to start understanding the psyche of these people and stopping them from just putting back into the world from which they originally came with no new knowledge of a world outside of that.
But you need to put, I think we need, before we do it, you'd have to put a lot of resource into it, and you'd have to make sure that the social services and prison service have the skills, which I really doubt, actually, at the moment, if they've got the people who are capable of doing it.
We've hacked the support systems when they come out of prison to death because of the cuts, and that's the real issue.
Anyway, moving on. Steady yourselves, because I've got some exciting news for everybody. For the first time in pledge history...
You found a lover.
And this is massive. Shut up, you. We have decided to give our very prestigious Straight Talker Award to the same person for the second week in a row. No. Look at how excited these faces are.
Whoa.
This is a man so honoured by the recognition he received from this show last week. He couldn't wait to heap the praise back on the pledge when he told his listeners all about us on his Absolute Radio show. Yes, Frank Skinner, I'm talking about you. So let's have a listen.
There's a programme on Sky which, I don't know if you're aware of it, it's a sort of a lowbrow debate show called The Pledge. And they've got opinions and that, and I'm not saying they're not imbeciles, but they don't really know the topics. They're there for a bit of, It's called The Pledge, by the way, I think, because it's named after Pledge, the multi-surface cleaner, because it cleans away any sort of nuance or subtlety or finer points of an argument and leaves it sparkling and easy to see.
Yes.
Lowbrow, trivial, imbeciles. Frank, I think you like us, really.
I wasn't on that show, actually, everybody.
Look what you've done, Frank. Look what you've done, Frank. From the real ledges at the pledge, Frank Skinner, you are our returning straight talker of the week. Come and have a go if you think you're good enough. Right, that's it from us for this week. We've got some cleaning to do, but don't forget you can join in the debate by searching for The Pledge on Facebook or Twitter. And you can even take the debate with you by subscribing to the New Pledge podcast, which is available on iTunes. Thank you for watching. If you need any cleaners, you know where we are.